The hospital lights flickered faintly as the receptionist's voice trembled through the phone. Mr. Grayson. Grace Bennett collapsed during her shift. No family listed. Only your name. Noah Grayson, the CEO known for his control, froze. He didn't ask questions. He just ran. Minutes later, snow clinging to his coat, he stepped into the hospital room. There she was, pale, unconscious, a fragile IV line, her only support. She hadn't eaten, barely slept, a nurse whispered. She gave everything until there was nothing left. She collapsed, holding everyone together but herself. And when the call came, he ran, not as a CEO, but as a man about to lose the one person who made him human. And in that moment, he finally broke his silence. New York City was buried in silence that night. Not the silence of peace, but the kind that weighed heavy with exhaustion. Snow blanketed every corner, muting even the honking horns and late-night sirens. Streetlights flickered like old memories trying to stay alive. The city that never slept looked half dead beneath the storm, as if it, too, had finally grown tired. Noah Grayson gripped the steering wheel of his luxury SUV, knuckles pale. It was nearing 2 a.m., and the car's interior smelled faintly of leather and espresso. He hadn't planned to be out this late, hadn't planned anything, really. Insomnia had become a familiar enemy, a dull ache that no expensive mattress or prescription could fix. So he drove, through the storm, through the silence, through the hollow spaces of a city that once thrilled him and now only echoed. The city felt numb, just like him. His headlights cut through a flurry of snow near East 94th Street, revealing a figure hunched on a bench at the bus stop. At first, he assumed it was a mistake. No one should have been out there in this weather. But as he slowed down, the shape became clearer. A woman, young, maybe in her late 20s, sitting still but visibly shivering. Her nurse's scrubs poked out beneath an oversized jacket. Her fingers, gloveless, were curled into her sleeves. Her face was tired, beyond tired, worn down in the way only people who give too much of themselves can be. Noah's foot hovered over the brake. "Don't stop," a voice in his head muttered. "You don't know her. You don't owe her." But something in the way she pulled her coat tighter, something in the way her eyes stayed locked on the ground, made him ignore the voice entirely. He rolled down the passenger window just enough to speak. "Hey," he said, "you're gonna freeze out here. Can I give you a ride somewhere?" She didn't look up right away, just a slow turn of her head, her expression unreadable. "I'm fine," she replied, though her lips were visibly trembling. "You're not," he said calmly. "The next bus won't be here for another hour. In this weather? That's dangerous." There was a pause. The city held its breath with them. Then she stood slowly, eyes narrowing with instinctive caution. "You're not some creep, are you?" she asked bluntly. Noah blinked, caught off guard by her directness. "No," he said with a faint, tired smile. "Just someone who couldn't sleep." Another beat. Then she nodded hesitantly and opened the door. As she settled into the passenger seat, she didn't thank him, didn't smile, just breathed out slowly, her hands hovering near the heater vents like it was the first warmth she'd felt in days. "Grace," she said softly, almost to herself. "Grace Bennett." "Noah," he responded. "Grayson." She glanced at him sideways. "Like the Grayson Foundation?" He gave a half nod but said nothing. And for the rest of the ride, the snow kept falling. Two strangers wrapped in silence. One couldn't sleep. The other hadn't rested in weeks. And yet, in the heart of a city that forgot how to feel, something began to stir. Something neither of them could name just yet. The ride was quiet, not the kind of awkward silence that fills space between strangers, but something deeper, like both passengers had learned to live inside their own noise. Outside, the city blurred behind frosted windows, its chaos smothered by snow and shadows. Grace sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her fingers tucked into her sleeves despite the heater gently warming the cabin. The coat Noah had given her was still wrapped around her like a shield. It smelled faintly of cedar and something expensive. She hadn't stopped shaking, not entirely from the cold. Noah didn't speak, didn't glance her way. His focus was on the road, steady hands on the wheel, jaw tense, eyes unreadable. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was oddly safe. Grace exhaled, slowly. She was so tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix. This was the weariness that seeped into bones, settled in the chest, and made every breath feel earned. She thought of the hospital, the patient who screamed for help with no family beside her, the boy in room 312 who cried himself to sleep because no one could afford his next treatment, the nurse who called in sick for the third time because childcare fell through again. The rest of the team had to pick up the slack. And she always said yes. Always. 2 jobs, 3 roommates, overdue rent. She hadn't checked her bank account in 2 days because the anxiety it triggered was worse than any pain. Her student loans loomed like a second full-time job. The bus she'd waited for tonight hadn't shown, but truthfully, even if it had, she wasn't sure she would have had the strength to climb on. Now she was in a Bentley. Life was strange like that. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice hoarse from cold and fatigue. "My place," Noah said simply. "It's 5 minutes from here. You'll be warm. Get some rest." She shifted uncomfortably. "I don't think—" "No pressure," he added quickly, glancing at her for the first time. "You can leave as soon as you want. Lock the door behind you. Take the guest room. Just don't go back into that storm." She looked at him, truly looked at him this time. Everything about him was too clean, too calm, too contained, from the crisp collar of his coat to the quiet strength in his voice. But there was something else behind his eyes, a kind of tiredness that matched her own, loneliness in a tailored suit. "I don't do this," she murmured. "Neither do I," he said softly. The rest of the ride was silent again, but softer now. She let her head lean back against the seat, her grip on the coat loosening slightly. When the car pulled into the underground garage of a building she could never afford in 10 lifetimes, he parked without a word and stepped out first. He didn't offer his hand, didn't insist, just waited beside the open door, letting her decide. Grace hesitated only a second longer, then stepped out. Somehow, despite everything, she didn't feel like she was walking into danger. She felt like she was walking into warmth. The apartment was far too elegant for someone like her. Grace stood awkwardly near the kitchen entrance, still wrapped in Noah's coat. Her oversized scrubs looked even more out of place under the soft golden lights that glowed over marble countertops and framed artwork. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a skyline blurred by falling snow, and the warmth inside was so complete it felt surreal. She had expected silence, maybe a cold spare room and a closed door. What she didn't expect was him standing at the stove in rolled-up sleeves, stirring something in a small pot. He looked nothing like a billionaire now, just a man, shoulders slightly hunched, hair a little messy, eyes focused on something simple. She cleared her throat gently. Noah turned and gave her a short nod. "Figured you might be hungry." "What is it?" she asked, hesitating near the counter. "Ramen. Nothing fancy, just warm." Her chest tightened. It had been so long since someone made food for her, since anyone thought to care in small ways. She took the bowl with both hands, inhaling steam and salt in memory. They sat in silence across the counter from one another, sharing nothing but the space. But somehow it felt like enough. That night she slept in the guest room. A bed too soft, sheets too clean, silence too unfamiliar. In the morning, sunlight stretched across the hardwood floor. Grace woke up to the faint scent of coffee, but found herself alone. On the kitchen counter sat a note in neat, slanted handwriting. "There's cab money on the table. You can leave whenever you're ready." Noah, beside it, a crisp $100 bill and a simple business card. "Noah Grayson Capital Holdings." She stared at the name for a moment, her brow furrowing. She recognized it from headlines, Forbes lists, billionaire, investor, untouchable, Noah, and yet, last night he'd made her soup. She folded the note, took the money, and left the card behind. 3 days passed. Grace hadn't called. She didn't know what she would have said if she had. "Thank you for the ramen? For the warm bed? For not being what I feared?" Instead, she buried herself in overtime. It was safer that way, to stay in motion, to avoid unpacking what she felt when she left his apartment with a coat that still smelled faintly like him. It wasn't until the community health fair that she saw him again. The church gym was packed. Volunteers, patients, and makeshift medical booths filled the room. The hospital ran it every winter, offering free checkups and vaccinations to those without insurance. Grace had signed up for the extra shift, despite the exhaustion tugging at her spine. She was helping a frail older woman into a chair when her eyes landed on a familiar figure across the room. Noah. He was standing near the far wall, coat unbuttoned, snow still clinging to his shoulders, hands tucked into his pockets. No security, no press. Just him, watching quietly. Their eyes met. Hers widened slightly, his stayed calm. After a moment, she finished helping the patient, then walked over. "You followed me?" she said, teasing lightly. "No," he replied. "I fund this event every year. I just didn't expect to see you. Didn't peg you for the silent donor type. I prefer helping people who don't know I'm there." Grace tilted her head. "Then why let me see you now?" He didn't answer, just offered a subtle smile. They ended up grabbing coffee from a vending machine and walking through the small park beside the church, snow crunching beneath their boots. "Why do you do it?" she asked eventually. "Do what?" "Fund these things, show up without being noticed." Noah looked forward, thoughtful. "My mother was a nurse. She used to drag me to clinics like this when I was a kid. I hated it. But now, I think I miss the noise, the realness." Grace smiled. "She sounds like someone I would have liked." "She would have liked you." Before she could respond, a voice behind them called out, "Miss Bennett." They turned. A young father with a toddler on his hip approached nervously. "I didn't get to thank you," he said. "You helped me earlier, when I didn't have ID or insurance. Most people just brushed me off." Grace's smile softened. "Everyone deserves care." As they walked away, Noah was silent. But when Grace glanced at him, his eyes told her everything. Pride, sorrow, recognition. She didn't press, but in that moment, she felt something shift. Not just in him, but between them. Noah hadn't planned to care. That was the truth of it. Caring invited chaos. Caring meant risk, vulnerability, loss. He had learned that lesson early. 12 years old, standing at his mother's funeral, numb in a too large black suit. She had been everything he understood about gentleness, about goodness. A nurse at a city clinic who brought home more heartache than paychecks. She'd stayed late for patients who had no one, gave her gloves to the homeless in winter, and smiled even when she was breaking. Cancer had taken her quickly. The grief hadn't. His father buried himself in spreadsheets. Noah buried himself in ambition. But now, decades later, it was Grace's uniform that undid him. The same blue scrubs, the same tired fire in her eyes. The way she poured herself into others until there was nothing left. It wasn't love, not yet. It was memory, and a terrifying sense of déjà vu. So he did what he was good at. He acted from the shadows. First, he made a quiet call to a private agency. Within days, Grace's most crippling student loan disappeared from the ledger. She never got a letter, never knew why the balance was suddenly zero. Next, he reviewed the hospital's financial structure. Their free care program, especially the one she volunteered with, was struggling to stay afloat through winter. Anonymous funding arrived overnight. 3 years' worth, no name, just relief. Then came the scholarship. He created one in his mother's name. A full ride for nursing students who demonstrated both academic excellence and compassion in underserved communities. Grace's alma mater received the funds with disbelief. Again, no credit asked, no ceremony held. He did it all quietly, purposefully. He never told her. Not when she thanked the hospital staff for keeping the free clinic alive. Not when she joked about her loan servicer finally giving up. Not when a first-year nurse cried tears of joy on her break after learning she'd received the new scholarship. Noah simply watched, from a distance. And when she smiled, really smiled, he felt something shift inside him. A silence cracking open. A breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for years. But he said nothing. He wasn't ready. Not yet. He had built his life on control. But Grace Bennett was the first thing that made him want to lose it. Beautifully, quietly, completely. And that terrified him more than anything. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and overbrewed coffee. Nurses moved briskly between rooms, their sneakers squeaking softly on tile floors. It was past midnight, and Grace Bennett was still standing. Barely. She hadn't eaten since morning. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted an IV line in room 308. The overhead lights buzzed like a tired heart refusing to stop. She blinked hard, her vision swimming. "Grace!" someone called from down the hall. "You okay?" She nodded. "Just one more round." But before she could take another step, her knees gave out. The floor came rushing up in a blur of white and gray, and the last thing she heard was the beeping of monitors. Fading. Noah was in a boardroom when the call came. He didn't ask questions, didn't finish his sentence. He stood, coat in hand, and left the meeting without a word. By the time he reached the hospital, the snow had started again. A soft, quiet storm that made the city feel smaller, more fragile. The nurse at the front desk recognized him, even if she didn't say it out loud. She simply gave him the room number and pointed. He found her in room 412, unconscious, hooked up to fluids, her skin pale under the sterile lighting. The sight of her stopped him cold. She looked small. A nurse passed by and paused. She collapsed mid-shift. Severe dehydration, exhaustion. She's been pushing too hard. Noah nodded numbly, stepped inside, and sat down beside her. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then gently, he took her hand. It was cold, just like that night at the bus stop. He held it in both of his, lowered his head, and whispered, "You didn't have to go through this alone." 2 hours later, Grace stirred. Her eyes fluttered open to the dim lights and a soft beeping nearby. Her throat was dry, her head pounding. And then she saw him, Noah, sitting beside her, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, hair slightly tousled like he'd run his hands through it too many times. "What?" she croaked. "You passed out," he said softly. "You're severely dehydrated and underfed." She blinked. "Oh, that's all." His voice cracked. "That's not nothing." She tried to sit up but winced. "Noah, I'm fine. I just pushed myself a little too hard." "A little?" he snapped, standing abruptly. "Grace, you work 2 jobs, skip meals, sleep 3 hours a night. How long did you think you could keep going like this?" She looked away, biting her lip. "I could have helped," he continued, pacing now. "You could have told me—" "I didn't want help," she interrupted sharply. Silence. He turned back slowly. "Why?" Her voice trembled. "Because I've always taken care of myself. Since I was 16. Because people leave, Noah. They show up, say the right things, and then they're gone. And I didn't want to owe anyone anything. I didn't want you to look at me like I was broken." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She wiped them away quickly, ashamed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to fall apart." Noah stepped closer, sat down slowly, took her hand again, but this time firmly. "You're not falling apart," he said. "You've been holding the world together with your bare hands." She met his gaze, raw and unguarded. "I didn't know how to ask for help," she admitted. "I know," he said gently. "But from now on, you won't have to." Her breath caught. "What does that mean?" "It means—" His voice softened. "From now on, I stay." He didn't say it like a man claiming something. He said it like a man making a vow. Grace let out a shaky breath, her fingers tightening slightly around his. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, she didn't feel like she had to fight alone. She didn't feel invisible. She felt held. There was no official move-in date. No bags packed with ceremony, no boxes labeled kitchen or fragile. It just happened. One evening, Noah offered to drive Grace home. She hesitated, then admitted, "I don't really live there anymore, do I?" He simply nodded. And from that moment, her things began appearing in his space. A toothbrush beside his in the bathroom, her scrubs folded next to his pressed shirts, a favorite mug tucked in the back of his cabinet. It was quiet, gradual, unspoken. But for Grace, it felt like walking a tightrope. Noah was always kind, thoughtful in his own way. She'd come home late from a shift and find a note on the counter. "Your favorite soup is in the fridge. Rest." Or he'd leave a warm pair of socks draped over the couch because "you always run cold." And yet, he never touched her. He never reached for her hand as they passed in the hallway. Never said goodnight out loud. Never once asked her to stay in his bed. He slept on the couch at first, then in the guest room. The boundaries were clear and stifling. Grace didn't know what they were. Roommates, friends, something more, something less. Some nights she'd lie awake listening to the soft creak of floorboards when he walked past her door. Pacing, silent, distant. She didn't feel unsafe. She felt unseen. And in a home filled with warmth, soft lighting, and everything money could buy, she began to feel like a guest in someone else's story. Worse, she began to wonder if she was just temporary comfort for a man who didn't know how to let people truly in. And the longer that question lingered, the colder even the warmest rooms began to feel. It was a quiet evening when Grace finally asked, "Noah, what are we doing?" He looked up from his desk, confused. "We live together, share everything, except the truth," she said softly. "You never let me in." He stayed silent. "I love you," she admitted, voice trembling. "I think I have for a while." Noah opened his mouth, but no words came. The silence between them stretched, thick and final. Grace nodded slowly. "It's okay. You don't have to say it back. But I can't keep waiting for someone who won't choose me." She packed that night. Noah stood in the hallway, frozen, hand on the doorframe. He didn't stop her. And when the door clicked shut, something inside him cracked. In the days that followed, he spiraled. Missed meetings, sleepless nights. He tried to find her, called the hospital, drove past old addresses, but she was gone. No note, no goodbye, just absence. And the memory of the one moment he should have spoken, but didn't. A full year had passed. Grace Bennett now wore her title, head nurse, with quiet pride. Life in upstate New York moved slower, kinder. The small hospital she worked at served families who remembered her name and brought her coffee and thanks. She had her own apartment now, her own peace. Most days she felt whole. Most. But some nights when the wind whistled like it did in the city, she still thought of him. She never told anyone about Noah Grayson. It felt like a story no one would believe. Then one snowy morning, she stepped into a flower shop she used to love in Manhattan, back in the city to visit her aunt after a minor stroke. The bell above the door chimed gently. She froze. He stood by the tulips, alone. Older, maybe. Softer somehow. Snow still melting on his shoulders. Their eyes met. He didn't look shocked. Just sure. He stepped forward slowly. "You're coming with me," he said, not as a command, but a request. His voice was low, steady, humble. Grace's eyes welled before she could stop them. She nodded, not out of weakness, but because she knew this time he meant it. He didn't take her back to the penthouse. Instead, he led her to a cozy brownstone near the park. It smelled of books, bread, and new beginnings. Her photo sat on the mantel. A blanket she once loved draped the couch. "You kept everything," she whispered. He met her eyes. "I kept you." And this time, when she unpacked her bag, it wasn't temporary. It was home. A year had passed. Grace was now head nurse at a small hospital in upstate New York, respected, steady, and finally breathing again. Life had quiet rhythm, and though she had healed, some nights still echoed with memories of the man who never said the words. Back in the city briefly to care for her aunt, she wandered into an old flower shop out of habit. And there he was. Noah stood by the tulips, snow clinging to his coat. Their eyes met across the silence. He stepped forward, slower this time, softer. "You're coming with me," he said. But now it wasn't a command. It was a plea laced with hope. She nodded. He didn't take her back to a penthouse. He brought her to a brownstone near the park. Warm, lived in, full of quiet details that whispered her name. "You kept everything," she said, touched. "I kept you," he answered. And this time she stayed, not as a guest, but as someone finally home. In a world that often moves too fast to notice who's falling behind, Grace and Noah's story reminds us of something deeply human, that sometimes it's not grand gestures that save us, but quiet ones. A ride on a cold night, a bowl of warm soup, a promise kept when no one's looking. In today's America, where burnout is a silent epidemic and self-reliance is worn like armor, this story speaks to a deeper truth. We all need someone to see us, to stay when it's easier to walk away, to remind us that softness is not weakness, it's courage. Noah learned that love isn't about control or perfection, it's about presence. Grace learned that letting someone in doesn't make you fragile, it makes you free. And maybe that's the question we leave with today. Is there someone in your life you've been too afraid to open up to? Or someone who showed up for you when no one else did? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your own moment of unexpected kindness or love in the comments below. If this story warmed your heart, even just a little, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Warm Soul Stories for more tales that speak not just to the mind, but to the heart. Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay warm and stay kind.